Secret love. When I was 17, I had a secret love. My family was poor. In order to buy him a birthday present, I saved money for a whole year. On the day my mother had an accident, I left school early. Just then I heard him say to his friend with a laugh, "This thing? Even the third prize item in a restaurant is better than it." His friend laughed out loud and said, "I know Ryan doesn't like it. If so, give it to me. I can sell it and use the money to surf the internet a few times. If you want it, then it's yours." Ryan threw it to him in disgust, and his line of sight happened to meet mine. Later, at a class reunion, I heard that Ryan had been looking for me for 8 years. When Ryan and I made eye contact, his expression froze slightly. The male classmate holding the watch scratched his head awkwardly, and then said, "Well, should I give it back to you?" I looked at the watch in his hand, which was so battered that it was obvious it hadn't been well cared for. This watch wasn't very expensive, about 1,000 yuan, but it took me nearly a year to save up for it. I saved every yuan from my meal money. My eyes fell on Ryan's hand. He was wearing a watch today. I couldn't recognize the brand, but I was sure that the watch on his hand was much better than the one I gave him. I silently took the watch from Ryan's friend and looked at Ryan and said slowly, "I'm sorry. I'll deal with it myself." Ryan lowered his eyes, pursed his lips and remained silent. I rubbed the watch in my hand embarrassingly and turned around to leave. When I passed the first trash can at the school gate, I made up my mind and threw the watch directly into the trash can. I turned my head and looked at him. He casually lifted his eyelids, with a smile on his lips and full of mockery in his eyes. I was stunned and lowered my eyes. It was so embarrassing. My secret love. At that time, I didn't know that this look for Ryan had almost become my nightmare. When I got home, my father was sitting at the door, with a cheap cigarette in his mouth and a worried look on his face. My mother was not there. He handed me a report, which said that my mother had breast cancer. My father took a deep drag on his cigarette and said, "Treating breast cancer costs hundreds of thousands of yuan. I've discussed with your mother. We won't treat it. Your mother said she wanted to eat the braised pork ribs I cooked. Go and buy some, and then I'll go and pick your mother up later." I didn't believe it. I flipped through the report over and over again, and said in a trembling voice, "Has it been diagnosed? There are a lot of misdiagnoses of this kind. Tomorrow I'll take my mother to see another doctor. This must be a misdiagnosis." I looked at my father stubbornly. My father's eyes were red. He just looked at me like that and didn't say a word. At that moment, my tears flowed down uncontrollably. Finally, I cried and said, "I'll stop studying and treat my mother." My father lowered his head. I knew that my father was no less sad than I was. My father's right leg was disabled. At that time, only my mother was willing to be with him, not loathe him, and always encouraged him. Although our family was poor, my father and mother loved each other very much. In junior high school, all the classmates in the class began to have their own beliefs. I asked my father, "Dad, what's your belief?" My father didn't understand what belief was. I roughly explained it to him. He scratched his head embarrassedly and said, "My belief is your mother." Later, I also had my own belief. I wanted to grow up, earn money and take my father and mother to see the world. Now my father's belief has collapsed. So has mine. I held my father's hand and said to myself, "I'll stop studying and go to work. Let's go to Beijing to treat my mother." My father smoked and didn't say a word, but I had already made up my mind. I asked my father to pick up my mother, and then I packed my things and went to Beijing. I myself went back to school. It started to rain when I was halfway there. The pedestrians on the road were in a hurry, all trying to get to their destinations before the rain got heavier. Only at this time did I dare to cry. The rain and my tears mixed together. When I got to school, there were almost no people there. I reached out towards the dirty trash can. The stinky and pungent smell kept rising. I rummaged through it several times, But my watch was still not there. I bit my lip and wanted to slap myself for throwing the watch away at that time. If I sold it, I could get several hundred yuan. I searched for several hours and rummaged through every piece of garbage in the trash can. But there was no watch. I walked home in a daze. By this time, there were hardly any people on the street. The rain was so heavy that it hurt a little when it hit my body. When I got home, my father hadn't come back yet. The usually warm home now felt so cold to me. I waited and waited. Finally, someone came to tell me in a hurry. Your father and mother jumped into the river. That year, I was in senior 3. I lost both of my parents and became an orphan. 8 years have passed, and I still can't forget what happened that day. I sat up on the bed and pressed the phone to turn it on. I found it was just dawn. I softly called out Dad. Mom. In the empty room with a sense of grievance. As usual, there was no response. I lowered my head. In the past 8 years, they haven't come to see me even once. In my dreams, there was only Ryan with a smile on his lips, a teasing look in his eyes. And he asked me with a laugh, "Do you have any self-respect?" Doris. Every time I shouted loudly that I had self-respect, the dream would end. I can't fall asleep anymore. So I simply get up and start packing things. After numbly arranging my parents' funerals back then, I left that place. I went to a new city and worked part-time while studying. Having to study and work at the same time was really tough. But I dare not let myself stop. Once I stop, I just want to cry. I went to the hospital. The doctor said I had moderate depression and needed someone to help me get out of that day. But there is no such person. I've been away for years. In recent years, I have increasingly wanted to go back and see the river where my parents jumped. I want to jump in and ask why they were so cruel. I'm really tired. Anyway, I'm going to go back. I don't reject those classmates from my class back then anymore. So when the monitor asked if I would go to the class reunion, I was the first one to say yes. I haven't spoken in the group for years. I've also deleted all my classmates, including Ryan. I bought the earliest high-speed train ticket. I was in a very relaxed mood. In the past 8 years, no day has been more relaxing than now. I admired the beautiful scenery outside the window and talked with the young couple in the adjacent seats with a smile. The girl said, "Sister, you don't know. It was so difficult for me to court him back then. He had so many girls chasing him. But I persisted for 2 years. Now I'm going to take him to meet my parents." Sister, are you so happy because you're also going home? I think the wind on the way to meet parents is sweet. I was silent for a while, then forced a smile and said, "Yes. I'm also going home. Going home. To see my parents." I said the latter words very softly, so that only I could hear them. But this sentence pleased me. I will be able to see my parents soon. I was humming a song all the way. After getting off the high-speed train, I went directly to the place booked by the monitor. When I arrived, most of the people had already come. As soon as I entered, it became instantly quiet inside. I sat down near the door on my own. I put away the smile on my face. The monitor pushed his glasses and broke the silence. "Doris, you're here?" I nodded. Jade, a girl who used to be at odds with me, sneered and said, "Well, isn't this the most difficult to invite, Doris? The top student? Seeing your face makes me lose my appetite. Someone should remind Ryan not to come today." No one knew the reason why I dropped out of school back then. But I liked Ryan. And they all knew that I gave him gifts. The girl sitting next to Jade pulled Jade. The monitor also frowned and said, "Say less. Ryan has been looking for Doris for 8 years. If you tell him, he will only be happy." Jade burst out laughing and said, "Ryan is kind-hearted. Who knows that one has to apologize even if they don't like someone? Looking for her for 8 years is just to apologize to Doris. Is it wrong not to like someone? Everyone knows that Doris transferred schools because Ryan embarrassed her. You make it sound like Ryan liked her. Doesn't Ryan have someone he likes? I heard that she is a rich and beautiful girl. Except for being good-looking. What is so special about Doris? Her disabled father? Her extremely poor family? Enough. The more Jade talked, the more excessive she became. And the others all frowned. I stood up. There was no anger on my face. I won't have dinner. You don't need to worry about losing your appetite. I just came to see everyone. Now that I've seen them, I'll leave. After saying this, I opened the door and walked out. The monitor chased after me. He held my hand and looked serious. Ryan has really been looking for you for 8 years. Won't you wait for him? Ryan's appearance emerged in my mind. He was very handsome and his eyes were very beautiful. But when he looked at me, there was no trace of emotion in his eyes. And a mocking smile played on his lips. I shook my head and said with a smile, I'm in a hurry. When you see him, help me say sorry. Really. Very sorry. The monitor froze on the spot. After leaving, I bought a lot of joss paper. I burned a great amount in front of my parents' graves. So much that it couldn't be used up in 100 years. After burning the paper, I went home and took a look. Dust had settled everywhere in the house. I didn't clean up or touch the things in the house. I stayed at the door for a while. It was already completely dark. There were no lights in the countryside. I turned on my mobile phone and saw that it was almost 11 o'clock. I took a taxi to Jinjiang. Jinjiang was very calm at night. Occasionally, a few motorcycles passed by on the street. All of them were delivery men. I pulled my suitcase and stopped at the bridge. No one noticed me because I was pulling a suitcase. They all thought that I was tired from walking and was taking a break at the bridge. I waited until 12 o'clock. There was no one passing by around me anymore. I wrote a note on my suitcase and resolutely climbed over the railing and jumped down. At the moment of jumping, I don't know if I misheard, but I heard Ryan's voice. Damn it. Don't jump. Doris. When I lost consciousness, I seemed to see Ryan again, wearing his high school uniform, leaning against the railing in the corridor, his coat loosely draped over his body, a lollipop in his mouth, his eyebrows slightly raised and his eyes full of amusement as he said, Well, isn't this the study committee member? In the first year of high school, I had heard of Ryan. The girls in the class would talk about Ryan every day. Because Ryan was really handsome. He was fair-skinned. His facial features were sharp and clear. His eye-tails were long. And when he smiled, he looked even more charming, wild and flamboyant. When we were divided into classes in Senior 2, Ryan and I were assigned to the same class. And he sat behind me. After class, there were always a bunch of people gathering around behind me, chattering noisily. I had never been surrounded by so many people before, and I wasn't used to it. So I pretended to go out to get water with a full water cup. In fact, I hid beside the back door. Then, I heard them talking about me. You say what's on the head teacher's mind. He clearly knows that Ryan likes beautiful girls. But among the girls around, there is only the study committee member. The head teacher is so cruel. Everyone knows how many pretty girls Ryan dated in Senior 1. Now it's not that Ryan is not allowed to be in contact with girls, but there is only the study committee member here. To be honest, Ryan, I've never seen such a frumpy person as the study committee member, who still wears small square framed glasses these days. Her bangs are thick and long, and she wears her school uniform neatly. She looks too much like an old pedant. Ryan, you can't be interested in her, right? After this sentence was said, there was a burst of laughter around. Fuck you. This was what Ryan said. His voice was husky during the voice-changing period, but it sounded very nice. Then, he sneered and said softly, Am I, Ryan, that undiscriminating? I was slightly stunned. Looking at my whitish shoes and school pants, I suddenly felt a bit embarrassed. I lowered my head and didn't quietly return to my seat until they had finished this topic. During breaks, My seat never seemed to be mine. There were always girls coming to find Ryan nonstop. Ryan always welcomed them all. Later, the school added an extra swimming class, and the swimsuits were ordered as a set. Before the end of the class, the teacher instructed me, "The study committee member will collect this money." Jade chuckled softly and raised her hand to ask, "Teacher, everyone knows that Dora's family is poor. Isn't it inappropriate to let Doris collect this money?" I clenched my hands a little tightly. Jade and I didn't get along well since senior one. Unexpectedly, we were in the same class again after the class division in senior two. To be honest, Jade and I didn't have any big feud before. It's just that Jade didn't like the sight of me adhering to the principle of the less trouble the better. I was just about to tell the teacher that it was okay not to let me do it. At this time, a pair of beautiful hands with distinct knuckles suddenly stretched out in front of me. "Here, study committee member." I looked up in sore eye and looking down at me. His eyes were extremely beautiful, and I was stunned for a moment. Maybe I was stunned for too long. The person beside Ryan nudged him and said with a flirtatious laugh, "Well, he has charmed another one." Hearing this, I came to my senses. But Ryan suddenly bent down close to me. My pupils dilated. He smiled roguishly and said softly in my ear, "I know I'm handsome, but study committee member, you're not my type." I lowered my eyes, took the money from his hand, then turned around to look at him, nodded and said softly, "I know." Ryan was stunned for a moment, then raised his eyebrows and said, "Good. Study hard. Study committee member." After that, Ryan straightened up and left the classroom while tossing a basketball. The others in the class didn't hear what Ryan and I had said. They only knew that Ryan seemed to be very nice to me. So they all gave me the money. Jade reluctantly gave me the money, and also warned me, "Stay away from Ryan. Look at your family conditions. You're like a toad dreaming of eating swan meat." I ignored her, silently collected all the money, and then took out my living expenses to pay for the swimsuit. After counting and making sure there was enough money, I immediately gave it to the teacher. As soon as school was over at noon, by the time I had paid the money, they had almost finished eating. I took out a steamed bun from my bag and started eating it in the empty classroom. My mind was full of thoughts about how to find a part-time job to earn living expenses. If I asked my parents for this money, they would surely give it to me. But I didn't want to. When I was halfway through eating, Ryan came in. He was a little surprised to see me. I just took one look and then lowered my eyes and continued to eat the steamed bun silently. Ryan walked straight to his seat. Suddenly, he poked me. His voice was husky. "Are you done eating? Study committee member?" I stuffed the remaining 2 bites of the steamed bun into my mouth, turned my head and nodded silently. He turned sideways and lifted up his school uniform. There was a large abrasion on his waist that was still oozing blood. He tilted his head and smiled at me. "Help me put some medicine on it." "Okay?" I quickly chewed the steamed bun in my mouth and nodded softly. "Okay." I walked to his side and squatted down, looking through my pocket for the medicine for the waist. I frowned and asked, "Why didn't you buy Yodo PHR? Alcohol will be very painful." Ryan chuckled softly. A real man is never afraid of pain. As soon as Ryan finished speaking, I dipped a cotton ball in alcohol and wiped his wound. Hiss! I looked up at Ryan and asked rhetorically, "A real man?" Ryan looked down at me, stunned for a moment, and then smiled and said, "Study committee member. Your eyelashes are really long." His tone was extremely frivolous. I knew very well that Ryan just said it casually. I lowered my eyes, but the movement of my hands became heavier. Ryan didn't make a sound, but his abdominal muscles were very tense, which was enough to show that Ryan was in great pain. Unable to bear it any longer, Ryan said through gritted teeth, "It really hurts. Be a bit lighter." I paused my movement and subconsciously blew gently on the wound. After blowing, I was stunned, and Ryan was also stunned. Then neither of us said anything more. After applying the medicine to Ryan, My relationship with him was still like that of strangers. After class, I could even see him sending other girls back to the dormitory. There is a very big tree in front of our dormitory. Ryan and that girl were standing under the big tree. That girl was very good looking. She was a senior in Senior 3. She stood on tiptoe and pouted at Ryan. When Ryan bent down, he suddenly glanced at me. I quickly turned my head away. Ryan shifted his gaze. He just bent down to pinch the girl's face and left with a smile. I don't know why, but I always pay more attention to Ryan. Lying on the dormitory bed, I thought about it and finally came to the conclusion I like his face. Just looking at it is also good. Later, when I ran into Ryan walking with other girls, I would quickly walk to a place where I couldn't see Ryan, or walk far behind with my head down. I think this way I won't offend Ryan. When Ryan was injured again, he came to me with medicine. This time it was his arm. He propped one hand on the desk, raised his injured arm at me and blinked, saying, "Study committee member." As soon as I picked up my bag, I found that the senior girl from Senior 3 had come. I suddenly sat up from my seat and my hat hit Ryan's chin. His study committee member. If you want me to die, you don't need to hit me with your head. What if I become stupid? As he said this, he reached out his hand towards my head. I dodged backwards to avoid Ryan's hand. Seeing that the figure of the senior girl was getting closer and closer, I hurriedly bowed to Ryan and then ran away. Ryan stayed where he was, with an expression that was somewhat difficult to understand. The swimsuit arrived. The first class in the afternoon was a swimming class. Everyone changed into their swimsuits. I had never worn such revealing clothes before, so I put a coat over my swimsuit. Hey, damn it. Ryan has long legs. Hearing this voice, I turned my head to look around. Then that voice rang out again, full of surprise. Damn it. It's actually the study committee member. I just realized that they were talking about me, and I nervously tugged at my clothes. My eyes met Ryan's, and I subconsciously looked Ryan up and down. The swimsuit was very tight, showing his clearly defined abdominal muscles, broad shoulders and a narrow waist. A typical inverted triangle figure. But he seemed a little unhappy. I lowered my head. Also, Ryan doesn't like me, and he probably doesn't like me looking at him either. When gathering, the teacher saw me wearing glasses and frowned, saying, "Didn't you go to get prescription goggles? How can you swim like this? Don't you have any common sense?" Jade laughed and said, "Teacher, you are right. Her father is lame. Her mother didn't even graduate from primary school. And the family is so poor that it's a question whether they can have enough to eat. Teacher, how can she know that she needs to get prescription goggles for swimming?" Jade seemed to be explaining for me, but actually made my family's situation clear. The teacher looked surprised, then was silent for a while and said dryly, "If your myopia is not too severe, you can take off your glasses." Jade raised her hand again. "Teacher, she is a top student and reads books every day. How can her myopia not be severe?" At this time, Ryan impatiently clicked his tongue and said, "Are you the only one with a mouth? Are you so noisy?" Jade's face turned red with embarrassment, but she didn't dare to refute, just silenced and lowered her head. The teacher didn't mention this matter anymore. I took off my glasses only when I got into the water. Because of my high myopia, I was alone by the side, afraid of bumping into someone. As much as I didn't want to, I still bumped into someone during practice. Because I didn't wear glasses, I couldn't open my eyes in the water. So when I emerged from the water, the first thing I saw was a set of abdominal muscles. I quickly apologized. "Sorry. Are you okay?" After apologizing, I moved my eyes up to see who it was. My eyes met a face with a faint smile. "Study committee member?" My eyes widened, and I lost my balance and sank directly into the water. At this time, a hand lifted me up. I gasped for breath, looking at the blurry Ryan in front of me, my chest heaving. Ryan got closer, and carefully looked at my face. Then said with a smile, "Study committee member. Do you have some strange aesthetic quirks?" "What do you mean?" "It means..." Ryan bent down and whispered in my ear, "I take back what I said about you not being my type." I was stunned, and my ears quickly turned red until my whole face was burning uncomfortably. Breaking free from his hand, I swam clumsily to the shore, put on my reassuring glasses, and then let out a long sigh. Looking around, there was no sign of Ryan in the swimming pool. The blush on my face gradually faded, and my heartbeat returned to normal. "Don't believe it. Rion was just teasing you." I was warning the me at that time, but she couldn't hear me. And I woke up. I looked around the room. It was very simple, with only a computer desk, an esports chair and a computer. My clothes had been changed. Didn't die after all. I forced out a bitter smile, and walked out of the room dizzily. I found a girl leaning on the sofa watching TV. When she was happy, she casually picked up an apple on the table and started to eat it. It seemed that this should be her home. Maybe she saved me. I was just about to thank her. She frowned and stood up. Her expression suddenly became unpleasant. And she asked me reproachfully, "Who are you? Why are you in Ryan's house?" I was stunned. What did she say? She said this was Ryan's home? Seeing my stunned look, she walked up to me with her arms folded. "Hey, I'm asking you a question. Why are you in Ryan's house and still sleeping in his room?" The girl's face looked very unpleasant, and there was a possessive look in her eyes. I lowered my eyes and said, "I don't know him. He saved me." "You are his girlfriend, right? Thank him for me." "I'll leave right away." "Yes. You should leave quickly." I walked towards the suitcase in the corner. When I was going out, I accidentally bumped into someone. It was very hard, and my head hurt a great deal from the impact. I covered my forehead and looked up to apologize. After seeing Ryan's face clearly, my pupils dilated, and I involuntarily took 2 steps back. Ryan hadn't changed much. The only change was that he had lost his boyish air and become more mature and charming. He was carrying groceries in his hand. His eyes shifted to my hand pulling the suitcase, and he sneered, "What? Are you going to jump into the river again?" I looked at Ryan. This time, I didn't avoid his gaze and said softly, "Ryan, am I in your way?" Hearing this, Ryan's expression was stunned for a moment. Coming to his senses, he asked, "Doris, do you want to have dinner?" I shook my head. "No, I'm in a hurry." Ryan lowered his eyes and clenched the hand holding the groceries. "Can you stop trying to die?" I looked up at Ryan seriously and said, "You shouldn't have saved me. I just also want to have a home." Ryan's eyes lit up. And then I said, "A home with my parents. Although my father is lame and my mother is ill, the family that you would never want to have is the one I miss day and night." Ryan was silent. I walked outside. Ryan grabbed my arm and said, "Doris, I'm getting married." I paused inside softly. "Really? Then congratulations. Will you come to my wedding?" Ryan turned to look at me. His eyes were as bewitching as before. "Is it only with me that your wedding will be perfect?" I asked rhetorically. Ryan looked at me for a long time, and his thin lips slightly parted and he uttered one word, "Yes." I gave him a smile and said in a light tone, "Then I'll come. I don't want to leave you with any regrets." "When?" "In 1 month." "Okay." I promised Ryan and rented a house here for 1 month. In high school, I thought Ryan liked me too. So I saved up money for a long time to buy him a watch. But as it turned out, it was just my one-sided love. It was an embarrassing unrequited love. Now Ryan was getting married, and I would personally draw a full stop to my youthful unrequited love in my life. In the middle of the night the next day, Ryan knocked on my door. When I opened it, a strong smell of alcohol hit me. It was raining, and he was soaked through. Ryan pulled me into his arms all of a sudden, and his head was buried in my neck. Immediately, I felt a large area of my neck getting wet. Ryan turned his head and whispered in my ear, "Doris, I've been looking for you for 8 years. But you haven't revealed any information at all. Do you hate me?" Ryan's tone was a little aggrieved, and his words were a bit slurred. I turned my head aside and said, "Ryan, you're drunk." Ryan stood up straight and took out a watch. I was slightly stunned. This was the watch that I threw into the trash can back then. "I found it. Don't throw it away again." I lowered my head and said softly, "It's not something valuable. Don't keep it." Ryan's breathing became a little heavier. Suddenly, he pinched my chin and forced me to look up. His eyes were filled with strong possessiveness. The next moment, his keys landed heavily. His voice was low and hoarse, accompanied by indistinct words. "Doris, I regret it. I shouldn't have been jealous." I widened my eyes. Just as I was about to step back, Ryan tightened his arm around my waist, firmly holding me so that I couldn't step back until I was pressed against him. Ryan's tongue pried open my teeth and probed in forcefully. His hands imprisoned me, leaving me no room to retreat at all. Little by little, he made me filled with the smell of alcohol. Scalding and burning, a kiss that I had thought about for a long time in high school came true at this moment. I looked at Ryan expressionlessly, and then suddenly smiled and said, "Ryan, sleep with me. How can one only take without giving? In high school, you teased me like watching a performing monkey. Monkeys get tired too. They need some rewards to keep performing. What do you think, Ryan?" Ryan frowned and reached out to brush the broken hair beside my cheek and said softly, "Doris, you're sick. Come with me to see a doctor tomorrow. Okay?" Ryan's tone was extremely gentle. I tilted my head and saw the girl behind Ryan. It was raining, and she just stood quietly behind Ryan. At that time, I thought she was a little strange, but now I remembered. She and Ryan were from the same world. They grew up together. However, she doesn't know me and is unaware of all the girls related to Ryan. Since the swimming class, Ryan has been like a switch has been flipped, always fond of teasing me. When doing exercises, Ryan leaned against the window and snatched the exercise book from my hand, then taunted, "Study committee member. Still studying?" I stammered, "The exam is coming." The person beside us said with a laugh, "Ryan, why do you keep easing the study committee member? Look, you've made her so nervous." Ryan raised his eyebrows and leaned closer to look at my face as he said, "Let me have a look." I kept my head down all the time. When playing basketball, Ryan refused the water offered by other girls and said with a smile, "Sorry. Our class study committee member has brought me water." I hadn't brought him any water at all. After hearing that, I ran to buy water for him. Later, during the sports meeting, Ryan brought a girl with him. During that time, Ryan didn't even give me a glance. I saw him coaxing that girl, "Little miss, where can I find an umbrella for you? Isn't it okay to be in the sun for a while?" That girl was fair-skinned and very beautiful. I silently handed over my umbrella. That girl didn't even look at me and said, "It's so ugly. I won't use it. Whoever wants to use it can use it." Ryan threw the umbrella back to me and said, "Fine. Fine. If you don't use it, you don't use it. I won't play basketball anymore. Okay? Miss, you won't be exposed to the sun either." This was the first time I saw Ryan uncoaxing someone else. "Doris," Ryan called me. I came back to my senses and nodded distantly at him. "I will go to see the doctor. Before your wedding. I promise I will be healthy. Ryan, don't worry. I won't ruin your wedding. Please be at ease and leave." Ryan was originally at the door. I just closed the door and separated Ryan and that girl. Ryan knocked on the door and shouted, "Doris. Doris." Then I heard the girl's voice, but couldn't make it out clearly. But Ryan didn't knock on the door again. I took a few pills and lay on the bed. Suddenly, I dreamed of my parents. During the summer vacation of sophomore year in high school, my family was harvesting millet. Jade, in order to embarrass me, called on most of the classmates in the class to help me harvest the millet. My father and mother took out the best food to entertain them. My parents didn't see the disgusted look in their eyes. But I did. Ryan was the first to speak. "Uncle, this fish is delicious. Is it wild?" My father nodded with a smile. "Yes. There are a lot in the river. There are still a few in my tank. You can take them back to eat." Ryan ate happily, and then went to help harvest the millet after eating. He didn't know how to do it. So I taught him. He pinched my face with a smile and said, "Doris, you know so much." After that, he silently started working. The others couldn't keep it up after working for a while and began to play something else. Seeing this, I ran to the grocery store and bought a big bag of popsicles. I took them back and distributed them to eat. Jade folded her arms. "We are working for you. At least you should treat us to something better. Are you really not ashamed to take out such cheap popsicles?" I said at once. "These are thirst quenching." Throughout the process, only Ryan did the most work. My father praised him directly. The others left one after another, and only Ryan worked until it was dark. When it was dark, the road was hard to walk. My father said, "Young man, stay for one night before you leave. I'll let Doris make a bed for you." My room was on the second floor. Ryan made a bed on the balcony on the second floor. The house was not soundproof, and I could hear Ryan tossing and turning and unable to fall asleep. So I lit a mosquito repellent incense and took it over. As soon as I walked up to him, he opened his eyes and said with a smile, "What? Does the study committee member want to do something to me while I'm asleep?" I put down the mosquito repellent incense, crouched down and asked softly, "Are you in pain?" Ryan was pampered. When had he ever done farm work? Even if he didn't say it, I knew he must be in pain. I couldn't see Ryan's expression clearly in the dark. He was silent for a while and said in a hoarse voice, "Yes. It hurts." I put my hand on his arm. "I'll rub it for you. It will be okay once it's rubbed loose." I silently rubbed Ryan's arm and felt that his body temperature was getting higher and higher. I asked, "Are you hot?" He coughed softly twice and said, "No. I'm not hot." Study committee member. You are really good at rubbing. I feel much better. After a while of silence, I thanked him. "Ryan, thank you today. If it weren't for you, my parents and I would still have to harvest for many days." Suddenly, Ryan put one hand on the back of my head and pushed me down a little. All I could see clearly were his eyes, with a burning look in them. He asked, "Can I have a kiss?" I was stunned but nodded. After I nodded, it was Ryan's turn to be stunned. He let go of his hand and said, "I was joking." I didn't stop what I was doing with my hands and just said, At the beginning of Senior 3, Ryan was a bit cold towards me. I had already started saving money at that time. I thought it was to repay Ryan for his help. Because I had good grades, people often came to me to ask questions. There was a person named Jay who could come to me 7 or 8 times a day. When Ryan passed by, he smiled in a strange way and said, "Jay, do you regard the study committee member as a free teacher?" Then he bent down and looked at me and said, "Doris, you can get rich by this." His tone was a bit sarcastic. I frowned, not knowing where I had offended him. But I didn't say anything. It was not until I gave Ryan the watch I bought with the money I had saved for a long time. I heard Ryan's words when I left early that day. Then I realized that Ryan seemed to have never looked up to me. He treated me like teasing a kitten or a puppy. When he was happy, he would tease me. When he was unhappy, he would leave me aside. There was no real affection at all. After getting up, I went to the hospital. The doctor asked me, "What's the situation?" I said, "I was diagnosed with moderate depression before." The doctor let out a long sigh and said, "Moderate. Still controllable. Let's do another check." I nodded and took the examination form, but suddenly changed my mind halfway. So I left. As soon as I walked out of the hospital, I met Ryan waiting at the hospital entrance. He walked towards me and asked, "Have you had the examination? What medicine did the doctor prescribe?" I was a bit annoyed, but still smiled and lied. "I've done everything. The doctor said I was in a very good state." Ryan frowned. "Doris, do you know? When you lie, your eyes are extremely focused." I stopped smiling and raised my eyes and asked, "Ryan, do you like me? You are so concerned about me. Does your girlfriend know?" I was not afraid that Ryan would mock me when I could ask this question. But Ryan's answer was completely unexpected to me. He took out a cigarette, lit it, took a puff, and said with a smile, "Yes, I like you." Ryan's voice exploded in my ears. I was only shocked for a second, and then said with a smile, "I don't like you. Ryan, I know. I'm chasing you." Ryan stubbed out the cigarette in his hand. "Then die with me, Ryan." I stood still waiting for Ryan's answer. He looked at me for a long time. So long that I lost my patience. Just as I turned my head, Ryan's voice came from behind. He said, "Okay." Then he took my hand and asked, "How do you want to die? Jump into the river? Or jump off the building?" I was silent. "You are still going to get married, Ryan." But Ryan seemed to be determined. He sneered. "Getting married was originally a trick to keep you. Why should I get married? And who should I marry? What about that girl?" "Do you mean Snow?" Ryan asked. I nodded. "So that girl's name was Snow." Ryan rubbed his forehead. "She is my brother's girlfriend. It's not good for me to snatch her, right?" "That girl was Ryan's brother's girlfriend? But you clearly showed some feelings for her." Before I could finish my words, Ryan just smiled. "How could it be okay? My brother would really beat me up. Since we've talked about this, we might as well finish it all. Last night she came to me just to persuade me. And back then, I said those things because I was jealous. The gift you gave, it was very nice." I was a bit dazed. As if I saw Ian in high school smiling and saying to me, "Study committee member, this watch is very nice." After we had this talk, the barrier in my heart should have been broken, but I still felt very depressed. I pushed Ryan away and said seriously, "But the present Doris is not the Doris in the past. Go away." Ryan didn't leave but just followed me closely. I was a bit impatient. "You will delay me from finding a boyfriend like this." I just wanted Ryan not to be around me. As for the boyfriend, it was still an non-existent thing. But Ryan still shamelessly followed me around. "Doris, isn't it good for me and him to serve you together?" My face turned a bit red. And then I sneered. "Do you still have abdominal muscles? What do you use to compete with others? Rely on your thick skin?" Ryan lifted his clothes, grabbed my hand and made me touch his abdomen firmly, sliding up and down, and said in a hoarse voice, "Are they there? Touch more." I wanted to withdraw my hand, but Ryan didn't allow it, and even pulled my hand down further. He smiled at me and leaned close to my ear and said, "I wanted to do this when we first went swimming." Ryan was becoming more and more shameless. Every day he accompanied me and took me to a lot of out-of-the-way places. But there was one common feature. That is, they were all places for worship. "When did you start believing in these? And you believe in quite a variety." He grinned and said, "Well, I hope they will all bless you." I was stunned. Ryan pestered me like this for a year. And finally I compromised and quickly got the marriage certificate with him. Ryan's parents didn't care about this at all. Ryan smiled and said to me, "They are used to it. Since we were young, neither my brother nor I have been taken care of by them. They just give us some money and food." Only then did I know that Ryan's parents' relationship was very bad. Ryan's father had a mistress outside, and his mother also had her own lover. The marriage between the two is only in name. If it weren't for the company, they would have divorced long ago. Fortunately, Ryan still has his brother. Later, I happily stayed with Ryan every day. I laughed a great deal, but I knew that I was not actually cured. I secretly went for an examination once. The doctor said it was severe depression, and it had been going on for some time. I had serious somatization reactions. But I hid all of this from Ryan, until I unconsciously swallowed a large number of sleeping pills. When I woke up, Ryan was sitting beside my bed with red-rimmed eyes. He rubbed my hand and said, "Doris, you are not allowed to die." When Ryan went out to buy food for me, Snow came. She clenched her fists as she looked at me and said with a light snort, "Doris, do you know that Ryan's brother passed away in his senior year of high school? Even if you pity Ryan, don't die, okay?" "He never told me," I said softly. Snow turned her head away. "He doesn't want you to pity him for your sake. He wants to cure you. But who will cure him? He is always so silly." At this moment, there was love in Snow's eyes. Snow had fallen in love with Ryan. I looked at her and said, "You will cure him, right?" Snow's expression darkened. Looking earnestly into my eyes, she said, "If I could, in these 8 years, there would have been no place for you long ago. He only regards me as his sister-in-law. Doris, he only wants you." After hearing Snow's words, I tried hard to receive treatment. At first, the results were not very obvious. Ryan knew it, but he didn't say anything. Late at night, after Ryan tested whether I was sound asleep, he kissed my forehead and said, "Doris, if it's too hard, just leave. I will be with you." I closed my eyes, and my eyelashes trembled wildly. Ryan hugged me and stroked my back over and over again to comfort me. That night, it seemed that Ryan and I both made up our minds. Since it was really so painful, let's die together. When everything was ready, suddenly I vomited violently. After going to the hospital for an examination, the report showed that I was pregnant. The fetus was already 4 weeks old. I was stunned, and so was Ryan. At this moment, the barrier in my heart seemed to break suddenly. I turned my head and we looked at each other and smiled. Holding hands, we went home in the sunset. Ryan excitedly touched my belly and then said, "Shall we go fishing and eat it, Doris?" I seemed to see my father talking with a smile and my mother listening gently. I nodded and said softly, "Yes. Yes. 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 Yes."